All right, so you're here to really get into the weeds, huh? To kind of skip all the fluff and really like grasp the core of something pretty fascinating, right? Well, today we're diving deep into a story, well, a myth really, that's kind of woven itself through history. We're talking Medusa.
Yeah, and we're using the Wikipedia page on Medusa as our starting point for this deep dive. And it's kind of wild how much this one source really covers, from like her earliest mentions all the way to, these really surprising modern takes on her.
Exactly, exactly. And our goal here isn't to just, rehash the basic stuff, snakes for hair and turning people to stone. We want to kind of dig deeper, right? Like find those really captivating bits of knowledge, uncover the layers of meaning that have kept this myth alive for so long, right?
Right.
Okay, so Medusa, where does her story even begin?
So in the world of mythology, Medusa is one of the three Gorgon sisters, daughters of primordial sea deities Phorcys and Ceto. And what makes Medusa stand out right away is that unlike her sisters, Euryale and Skino, she's generally considered the only mortal one.
So even among these, legendary monsters, there's a hierarchy, a unique characteristic,
Right.
and that classic image we all have, right? The snake hair, the petrifying gaze, that's like central to her identity.
Absolutely. That image, the woman with like living venomous snakes for hair and the power to turn anyone who looks at her to stone, that's the enduring symbol. And you'll also hear her referred to as Gorgo, or even just the Gorgon, which sometimes can refer to the archetype itself, like that kind of terrifying female creature. It's also worth noting she's related to the Grai, those sisters who share a single eye and tooth.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
So this whole mythological family tree is kind of interconnected in these really unexpected ways. When did we first start seeing written accounts of Medusa? Like, who are the first people to tell her story?
Well, we get glimpses of her myth from some of the earliest Greek writers, like Hesiod in his Theogony lists the Gorgons as offspring of Phorcys and Ceto. And Apollodorus, in his library, agrees with this lineage. Later, the Roman writer Hyginus throws a little twist in. He names Gorgon as one of the parents, along with Ceto. So even at the very beginning of her story, there's variation.
It's like even the details were fluid from the start. What about descriptions of her appearance and where these early writers placed her demise?
Well, Aeschylus, in his Prometheus Bound, paints a really vivid picture. He describes the Gorgons as winged figures, snakes for hair, and he says they harbor this deep hatred for mortal man and live on, get this, Kistine's dreadful plain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, both Hesiod and Aeschylus place her death in the vicinity of Sarpedon, near this, kind of ominous-sounding Kistine.
Kistine's dreadful plain, not exactly a tourist destination. It's interesting how these early accounts give her like a specific, almost like grounded location. Were there any other geographical links to her myth in the ancient world?
Yes, there were. Dionysios Scatabrachion, a writer from the 2nd century BC, he places Medusa in Libya. And even more interesting, Herodotus, the historian, had earlier suggested that the origins of her myth might be traced back to the Berber people in Libya. So, hinting at some potential cultural exchange or influence, the geography of Medusa wasn't fixed. She seems to have been a figure who resonated across different regions.
That's fascinating, the idea of a myth like migrating and adapting across cultures. Now, the centerpiece of Medusa's story for a lot of people is her clash with the hero Perseus. What sets that famous encounter in motion?
So the myth of Perseus and Medusa, it's like this classic heroic quest. It's set in motion by King Polydectes. He desires Perseus' mother, Danae.
Okay.
To get Perseus out of the picture, Polydectes sends him on this, what he believes is an impossible mission to fetch the head of Medusa. However, the gods, knowing Polydectes is being deceitful, they step in to help Perseus.
Talk about divine backup. What kind of assistance did he get from, the mythological A-team?
Oh, he got hooked up. Perseus was equipped with several crucial items. He had a polished mirrored shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes that let him, fly really fast, a sharp sword, often attributed to Hephaestus, the god of, crafting, and even the helm of invisibility that belonged to Hades.
Wow, so he was definitely geared up for success. So how did he actually, confront a monster whose gaze could literally turn him to stone? That's a tricky obstacle to overcome.
Right. Well, knowing the danger of direct eye contact, Perseus uses Athena's mirrored shield in a really, really smart way.
Oh, how good.
By looking at Medusa's reflection, he can safely approach her and sever her head. And here's a really, really striking detail. At the moment of her beheading, Medusa was actually pregnant by Poseidon.
Pregnant by the sea god. The plot thickens in the most unexpected way. What came of this dramatic moment?
From Medusa's severed body sprang two significant offspring. Pegasus, the winged horse, the one everyone knows,
Sure.
and Chrysaor, a giant, who's often depicted wielding a golden sword. So a truly mythical birth from a monstrous death.
Wow. So a hero's quest, divine gifts, a deadly confrontation, and then winged steeds and giants bursting forth. This myth is so densely packed with incredible imagery. It makes you wonder, what's the underlying message? How have people interpreted this story, throughout history?
Well, this is where the myth really opens up to a wealth of interpretations. Jane Ellen Harrison, a very influential classical scholar,
Okay.
she proposed that Medusa's power actually resided not in her living form, but in her severed head. She saw the Gorgonian, that, iconic image of Medusa's head,
Yeah.
as originally a potent ritual mask, like a sacred object whose meaning was kind of lost or distorted over time.
So the terrifying image, it wasn't meant to inspire fear. It originated from some primal terror.
Exactly, yeah. Harrison famously stated, "The Gorgon was made out of the terror, not the terror out of the Gorgon."
Oh, wow.
Even Homer in the Odyssey, he mentions a dreadful monster's grisly head sent by Persephone. He doesn't actually name Medusa, but it kind of hints at that enduring power associated with this image.
Yeah, the severed head is a source of immense power. It's a killing concept. And
Yeah.
Perseus certainly put that power to use after the beheading, didn't he? It wasn't just a trophy.
Absolutely not. Ovid recounts how Perseus, while flying over northwest Africa, he encounters the Titan Atlas, who's burdened with holding up the sky.
Oh, right, right.
When Atlas threatens him, Perseus uses Medusa's head to turn the Titan to stone, which, creates the Atlas Mountains. Similarly, the myth tells us that when Perseus briefly rested in Ethiopia, drops of Medusa's blood fell onto seaweed and transformed it into the corals of the Red Sea.
So even in death, her essence had this transformative, almost magical quality. And the snakes in her hair weren't the only venomous things linked to her demise, were they?
You're right, they weren't. Several ancient writers, the author of the Argonautica, Ovid in his Metamorphoses, and Lucan in his Pharsalia, they all claim that the venomous vipers of the Sahara Desert, they sprang forth from drops of her spilled blood. Even the Amphisbaena, that mythical serpent with a head at both ends, is said to, share this origin.
It's like every part of her being, even in death, unleashed these potent, often dangerous forces upon the world. And Perseus still had one final task to do with Medusa's head upon his return.
Right.
King Polydectes was still a problem.
Right, he was. Upon returning to Seriphos, Perseus discovered that his mother was still being harassed by King Polydectes. And so in this final, very dramatic confrontation, Perseus uses Medusa's head to turn Polydectes and his followers to stone, finally, securing his mother's freedom. And the ultimate fate of the head itself is quite significant.
Yeah, where did such a powerful and dangerous artifact end up?
Well, Perseus presents the Gorgon's head as a gift to Athena, the goddess of, wisdom and warfare. Athena, in turn, affixes it to her shield, the Aegis. So it becomes this, this ultimate symbol of terror, transformed into an emblem of divine protection.
From monstrous head to a symbol of divine authority, that's a remarkable journey. Now, let's shift focus a bit to how Medusa has been visualized, over the centuries. I imagine the early Greek artists had a pretty monstrous take on her.
You're right. The earliest Greek depictions, the ones we find on vase paintings and relief carvings, they mostly portray Medusa and her Gorgon sisters as these grotesque, often winged creatures with glaring eyes, tusks, and of course snakes interwoven in their hair. But around the 5th century BC, something interesting starts to happen in the artistic representations.
A change in her look. Did artists start to soften her image? What sparked that shift?
It wasn't necessarily a complete softening, but there was a noticeable trend toward depicting her with more human-like features, even possessing a certain, terrifying beauty. And intriguingly, Pindar, writing around 490 BC, even refers to fair-cheeked Medusa in one of his poems. So this suggests the idea of her having some allure existed in earlier poetic traditions as well. The key takeaway here isn't just that her image changed, but that it reflects a deeper societal shift in how female power and beauty could be intertwined, even in a figure of terror.
Fair-cheeked Medusa. That's quite a contrast to the usual descriptions. What might have prompted this evolution in her artistic portrayal?
Well, Ovid, in his later Roman work Metamorphoses, he offers one very influential explanation. Though it's generally considered a later addition to the core myth, he recounts that Medusa was originally a beautiful maiden who was transformed into a Gorgon by Minerva, the Roman equivalent of Athena, as punishment for being with Neptune or Poseidon in Minerva's own temple.
So Ovid provides a tragic backstory explaining her monstrous form as divine punishment for perceived transgression. But you mentioned more beautiful depictions predate Ovid.
Right, exactly. Even before Ovid's account became, widely popular, there are examples in classical Greek art where Medusa is depicted as a really, really attractive young woman rather than, a purely hideous beast. One notable instance is the painter Polygnotus, who portrayed Medusa as a comely woman sleeping peacefully at the moment Perseus beheads her.
That's a powerful and somewhat unsettling image. A beautiful, vulnerable woman being slain. It definitely adds a layer of moral ambiguity to the traditional hero narrative. Was this intended to, evoke sympathy for Medusa or perhaps subtly critique Perseus's actions?
That's precisely the ambiguity that art historians often discuss. Was Polygnotus aiming to elicit empathy for Medusa's fate, or was he offering a more, nuanced perspective on the heroic act itself? Maybe, even questioning the glory of slaying an unsuspecting beautiful woman in her sleep. It leaves a lot open to interpretation.
It certainly does. It moves her beyond the simple monster archetype into something far more complex, even in these earlier artistic renderings. Now let's consider the Gorgons as a collective. We've mainly focused on Medusa, but there were originally three sisters, right?
Yeah, Hesiod and Apollodorus, they clearly identify three Gorgon sisters. However, Jane Ellen Harrison, again, provides a really insightful perspective.
Okay.
She argued that the idea of three Gorgons was a later development in the myth, and that Medusa was the original and the truly potent Gorgon.
So the other two, Stheno and Uriel, were almost secondary figures added later.
Harrison suggests that they were mere appendages due to custom. She proposes that common mythological motif of triple female deities like the Fates or the Graces that led to the expansion of Medusa into a trio, even though her core power and significance remained singular.
That's a compelling idea. The real power concentrated in the mortal Medusa, with her immortal sisters serving as almost symbolic echoes. It certainly recenters Medusa within the narrative. So we've explored the ancient origins and the artistic evolution. How have more modern thinkers and movements engaged with the myth of Medusa?
Well, modern interpretations of the Medusa myth are incredibly varied. They reflect, the diverse intellectual and cultural currents of recent centuries. Early scholars sometimes adopted a more, historical lens. They viewed the myth as a distorted recollection of actual events, maybe a sublimated account of an invasion or a significant societal upheaval, like Joseph Campbell's theory about the Hellenes.
Exactly. Joseph Campbell famously proposed that the Perseus myth, it symbolized the arrival of the Hellenic people in Greece around the 13th century BC, who he believed, overran existing goddess shrines and stripped priestesses of their Gorgon masks. He saw the myth as a symbolic representation of this sociological trauma.
Right, right. And then we move into psychoanalysis, where Sigmund Freud offers his own, influential, though, debated interpretation.
Freud and Medusa, I can only imagine the Freudian spin on this particular myth.
In his essay, Medusa's Head, which was published, posthumously, Freud famously links the terror of Medusa's image to the unconscious fear of castration, which is triggered by the sight of female genitalia, specifically the mother's.
Okay.
He interprets the act of beheading as a symbolic representation of, castration. And furthermore, he suggests that the ravishingly beautiful Medusa, she represents the innocent pre-Oedipal memory of the mother, while the classic snake-haired Medusa embodies Oedipal anxieties. So the snakes become phallic symbols, and the gaze represents like a primal fear. It's a very specific, and some would say limited perspective. Have more contemporary psychoanalytic thinkers offered alternative viewpoints.
Yeah, well, Beth Selig, for example, offers a more, trauma-informed perspective. She interprets Medusa's transformation, the turning of her hair into snakes, not as a consequence of a consensual encounter with Poseidon, as some versions suggest, but as a result of rape that occurred in Athena's temple. And she further connects this to Athena's own unresolved conflicts with her father, Zeus. This reading kind of centers Medusa's victimization rather than, her as a monstrous aggressor. And then, of course, there's the powerful feminist reassessment of Medusa, which has been particularly influential in recent times.
Absolutely. Rather than solely viewing her as a monster to be slain, feminists have reinterpreted Medusa as this potent symbol of female rage, resistance against, patriarchal power structures, and a figure who embodies the consequences of male violence, like Mary Valentis and Anne Devane in their book Female Rage, unlocking its secrets, claiming its power. They noted that Medusa was the first image that came to many women's minds when contemplating, female anger. So the snakes, they aren't just scary, they represent a kind of untamed, powerful feminine energy.
Yeah, and we see her image popping up in all sorts of contemporary contexts. Even something like the Versace logo, right? It's as if she's been entirely repurposed.
Exactly. Well, the very name Medusa can still, evoke connotations of monstrousness within feminist discourse. Her image has become very strongly associated with female strength, justified anger, and the act of pushing back against, oppressive systems. The feminist journal Women, a journal of liberation, in 1978, it featured Medusa prominently, asserting that her image could serve as, and I quote, a map to guide us through our terrors, through the depths of our anger, into the sources of our power as women.
Wow.
Yeah. Emily Irwin Culpeper further solidified this interpretation in her 1986 article, identifying the Gorgon face as, quote, female fury personified.
And this feminist reclaiming isn't just in academic circles, it's manifested in art and literature as well, right?
Absolutely. Alana Dykewoman's collection of stories, They Will Know Me by My Teeth, it features a Gorgon figure as this fierce guardian of female power. Stephen Wilkes suggests that Medusa's, enduring feminist appeal stems from her role as a fearsome protector of women's secrets and boundaries. Even in contemporary popular culture, Medusa is frequently invoked as a shorthand for potent feminine rage and refusal to be silenced or, victimized. And the idea of her as a victim of rape and then unfairly punished by Athena has really resonated with contemporary movements, right?
The hashtag #MeToo movement, for instance, has certainly highlighted parallels in her story.
Right, exactly. Elizabeth Johnston's 2016 Atlantic essay, it aptly named Medusa the original nasty woman, drawing attention to the, victim-blaming narrative embedded within the traditional myth. Contemporary artists like Judy Takacs with her hashtag Medusa2 series directly engage with this, reclaiming Medusa's beauty and reinterpreting her story as a powerful indictment of rape victim blaming. Mm-hmm. And Helene Sixtus's seminal essay, The Laugh of the Medusa, is a foundational text for this feminist perspective.
It's incredibly influential in feminist thought.
It is. Six has argued that, patriarchal structures have historically turned Medusa into our monster as a means of controlling and suppressing female desire and power. Her essay is this, passionate call for women to reclaim their own narratives through writing and to embrace their, quote, laugh as a symbol of liberation and self-expression. She urges women to look Medusa directly in the eye and see not a figure of death, but one of potent, life-affirming energy. So the monstrous image was a patriarchal construct to suppress female agency. That's a really compelling interpretation. Now, shifting to a completely different perspective, the Wikipedia entry also mentions a nihilistic interpretation of Medusa. It's a bit unexpected after all this talk of empowerment.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast. How does Medusa connect to nihilism?
In this reading, Medusa's petrifying gaze is interpreted as a representation of scientific determinism and the bleakness of nihilism, that idea that the universe is fundamentally without meaning or purpose.
Yeah.
Avoiding her gaze in this context becomes a metaphor for humanity's attempt to avoid confronting this harsh, meaningless reality.
Okay.
It is a pretty bleak take. Jack London, in his novel The Mutiny of the Elsinore, he employs Medusa in this symbolic way, quoting a passage by de Caceres that compares Medusa truth to Mile Eye, suggesting humanity's inherent instinct is to wage war against the cold, hard truth and seek refuge in comforting illusions.
From a symbol of potent female agency to a representation of ultimate meaninglessness, Medusa certainly embodies, a vast spectrum of human concerns. Now, we've discussed her artistic evolution in, broad strokes, but the Wikipedia entry provides this rather extensive list of specific artworks. Are there any particular standouts that highlight these changing interpretations?
Absolutely. Pauline Notic's vase depicting her beheading while asleep is an early example of that shift towards a more humanized Medusa. The Alexander mosaic, where her head appears on Alexander the Great's breastplate, suggests her apotropaic power. That is, her ability to ward off evil. Similarly, the Basilica cistern in Istanbul, it features column bases carved with her head, also believed to have these protective functions.
So warding off evil, that goes back to the Gorgonian idea.
Right, exactly. Then you have the Rondinini Medusa, a Roman marble copy that profoundly influenced Canova's neoclassical sculpture Perseus with the head of Medusa. Leonardo da Vinci, he also famously painted Medusa, capturing this sense of grotesque beauty. Cellini's bronze sculpture Perseus with the head of Medusa, it's a powerful Renaissance depiction of the hero's triumph.
Oh, I know that one. Perseus standing triumphantly with her severed head. It's quite dramatic.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Caravaggio's Medusa is a particularly raw and unsettling portrayal, capturing the horror of the moment. Rubens also created a striking head of Medusa, emphasizing the snake's vitality. Bernini's marble bust of Medusa conveys a profound sense of anguish. Later artists like Arnold Böcklin and Salvador Dali, they offered their own surreal and symbolic interpretations. And in more recent times, Luciano Garbati created this powerful sculpture of Medusa holding the severed head of Perseus, a direct reversal of the traditional power dynamic.
That's a powerful reversal. It really makes you rethink the whole story. And it's not just the world of fine art, is it? Medusa's image appears in other kind of unexpected places.
Right. Her head is prominently featured on regional symbols like the flag and emblem of Sicily.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a tradition that likely stems from an ancient association with Athena, who had a temple dedicated to her there. She even appears on the coat of arms of the village of Dohalis in the Czech Republic,
Yeah.
and has been used in various historical caricatures.
Sicily, that's a surprising connection. It shows how deeply embedded this myth is in Western culture. And the Wikipedia entry even touches on the sciences. How has Medusa's name or image influenced the scientific world?
Well, it's pretty remarkable, actually. Numerous scientific names across various biological classifications, pay homage to Medusa, often for organisms that possess a radial or tentacled form, like jellyfish, which of course are sometimes scientifically classified as Medusa. You also find her namesake in certain species of snakes and even a type of brittle star known as Gorgonophilis, literally Gorgon's head. There's even a genus of horned dinosaur called Medusaceratops.
Wow, from mythical monster to inspiring scientific nomenclature. That's quite a range. Finally, for our listeners who want to delve into the original tellings of this myth, what are the key ancient sources they should seek out?
Well, the primary Greek sources that feature Medusa include Hesiod's Theogony, Apollodorus' The Library, and Aeschylus's tragedy Prometheus Bound. For the Roman perspective, Ovid's Metamorphoses provides a particularly detailed and influential account. Medusa is also mentioned in other, significant ancient works like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Euripides' Ion, and Apollonius Rhodes's epic poem, the Argonautica. Roman authors who reference her include Virgil in his Aeneid, Lucan in his historical epic, The Civil War, and Valerius Flaccus in his own Argonautica.
So a wealth of ancient texts to explore for anyone wanting to, go right to the source. Well, as we conclude this deep dive, it's clear that Medusa's story is far richer and more multifaceted than a simple tale of a monster and a hero. She's undergone a remarkable series of transformations, evolving from a terrifying Gorgon into a potent symbol of female rage, a representation of, victimhood, and even a metaphor for nihilistic truth. This exploration of the Wikipedia entry reveals a figure whose complexity and resonance have only grown over time, mirroring the ever-changing concerns and perspectives of each new era that encounters her.
Absolutely. So, considering Medusa's multifaceted symbolism, this incredible journey from ancient terror to modern icon, what aspect of her enduring story resonates most powerfully with you today? And what might the reason for that personal connection be? It really invites us to ponder the lasting power of myth and the dynamic ways in which its meanings continue to unfold and reflect our own lives and the world around us. Welcome to the Deep Dives, everybody. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into the fascinating world of hyaluronic acid.
Yeah.
You might have heard about it. Hyaluronic acid, or HA for short. It's in all those skin creams and joint supplements. But today, we're going way beyond the marketing hype.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to uncover what this molecule really is, explore its curious history, and, understand the amazing range of applications it has. And we're doing this, of course, based on solid scientific info.
Right, yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've gathered a bunch of stuff, haven't we?
We have. We've got detailed scientific explanations, some accounts of its discovery and early uses, and then also kind of an overview of how it's used in medicine today.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning.
Mhm.
What exactly is hyaluronic acid?
Well, at its core, it's a polysaccharide.
Okay.
You can think of it as a long chain, like a necklace made of many repeating units.
Right.
And it belongs to a family of complex sugar molecules called glycosaminoglycans. And in the case of hyaluronic acid, these repeating beads are disaccharides. They consist of two specific types of sugar, D-glucuronic acid and N-acetyl D-glucosamine.
Got it.
And they're linked by, a specific type of chemical bond.
So it's a sugar necklace with a special connection.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's interesting. And where can we find this necklace in nature?
Well, it's pretty amazing how widespread it is. You can find it in a huge range of cells, from very simple ones like bacteria,
Okay.
all the way to, well, us, more complex organisms.
And in the human body, I bet it's in more places than we can even imagine.
Absolutely. It's super abundant in the skin, which is probably what most people think of first.
Yeah.
But it's also present in the vitreous humor of the eyes. That's actually, where part of its name comes from. The umbilical cord, synovial fluid,
Synovial fluid.
which is it acts like a lubricant in our joints.
Oh, okay.
It's in skeletal tissue, heart valves, lungs, aorta, prostate, a membrane that covers the testicles, and even in the erectile tissues of the penis.
Wow, that's a really wide distribution.
It is, yeah.
So who's responsible for making all this HA inside us?
Well, the primary production is handled by cells called mesenchymal cells,
Okay.
but other types of cells can also produce it. And here's a fact that might surprise you. So a person who weighs about 154 pounds, 70 kilos,
Okay.
has around 15 grams of hyaluronic acid in their body.
Okay.
And the really interesting thing is that about a third of that amount is degraded and then resynthesized every single day.
Wow, really? That's amazing.
Yeah, this rapid turnover suggests that maintaining sufficient levels of HA is just a constant, biological need.
So you mentioned something about bacteria before. What role does hyaluronic acid play in those?
So some bacteria that cause disease in humans
Right.
actually produce an enzyme called hyaluronidase.
Okay.
And this enzyme, what it does is it breaks down HA that's found outside cells in what's called the extracellular matrix.
Okay.
It's basically like the glue that holds our cells together. So by breaking down this glue, hyaluronidase actually becomes a virulence factor.
I see.
It helps the bacteria invade tissues. And this kind of highlights how crucial HA is for maintaining the integrity of our tissues. It's a function that our body is constantly balancing with its own processes of breaking down and rebuilding.
Okay, so we've covered the kind of basic science part. Let's move on to the history now.
Yeah.
How was this, so widespread molecule discovered?
Well, the story is actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So in 1934, there was a German pharmacist named Karl Mayer
Okay.
and his colleague, John Palmer.
Okay.
And they were working at Columbia University in New York.
Okay.
And they managed to isolate a previously unknown substance
Okay.
from it was in the ophthalmology lab at the university.
Okay.
And they extracted it from the vitreous humor of cow's eyes.
And cow's eyes. That's interesting.
Yeah. So they found out that this substance contained two sugar macromolecules,
Okay.
and one of them was glucuronic acid. So that's actually where the name comes from. Hyaluronic acid,
I see.
combining hyaloid, which means vitreous or glassy, and uronic acid.
Okay.
So Meyer realized that this substance, which was helping the eye maintain its shape,
Okay.
was incredibly viscous,
Okay.
which made him think that it could have therapeutic applications. It's really fascinating to think that this key property that Meyer noticed in the eye,
Right.
this thickness and ability to hold shape, is actually what makes it so valuable later on in everything from cosmetic fillers to joint injections.
Yeah.
But extracting it from cow eyes was, not practical on a commercial level.
Yeah, I can imagine how many cow eyes you would need. So how did it start being used commercially?
Right. Well, the first commercial use came in 1942, thanks to a Hungarian scientist named Andrei Balazs.
Okay.
And he used Meyer's techniques to synthesize the acid
Okay.
from rooster combs.
Rooster combs.
Yeah,
Right.
which, funnily enough, is still one of the most important sources of HA today.
So we get this ingredient from rooster combs.
Yeah.
Wow, I never thought of that.
It's almost poetic, isn't it? This molecule that's now like a staple of, high-tech skincare.
Right.
was first harnessed from, something as humble as a rooster's comb.
Right.
It's a real testament to the ingenuity of early, scientific exploration.
Absolutely. So what was that first patented use?
Well, hold on to your hats because this is a quirky one.
Okay.
As an egg white substitute in bakery products.
Wow. Really? Okay.
Yeah. So Belazes actually went on to pioneer research on HA for the next 50 years.
Okay.
And his contributions were so significant
Yeah.
that the International Society for Eye Research actually named an award in his honor.
That's amazing, the trajectory from cow eyes to bakery and, scientific awards.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Okay, so now that we know what it is and how it was discovered, let's talk about, how it actually works in our body.
Right.
What does it do?
So hyaluronic acid has a dual action against aging.
Okay.
So on one hand, there's intrinsic aging, which is just the natural aging that happens over time.
Okay.
And then there's extrinsic aging, which is caused by environmental factors,
Right.
like sun exposure.
Got it.
But its main superpower is its ability to retain water.
Okay.
It's like a molecular sponge that can attract and hold many, many times its weight in water,
Okay.
which is really, really crucial for, maintaining moisture levels in the skin.
Okay. So that's the key to its skincare fame.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how does that water retention translate into, visible effects for those of us using it?
Right. So in the skin, hyaluronic acid helps counteract the formation of wrinkles
Okay.
by replacing the volume of fluid that's lost with age.
Okay.
But not only that, it's also been seen to increase the production of collagen,
Okay.
which is the protein that gives skin its firmness, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, it also influences the shape of cells called fibroblasts, which are the ones responsible for producing collagen and elastin.
Okay.
So these collagen-producing cells, they can change their shape, and it seems like HA encourages them to adopt a shape that's more efficient at producing this, this crucial protein for skin firmness.
So, yeah, interesting. Let's move on now to the clinical applications.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they were very diverse.
Yeah.
So let's start with what's probably best known. It's cosmetic and aesthetic use.
Okay. Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So its ability to, develop collagen, retain water, and act as a dermal filler has made it a star ingredient in cosmetics, aesthetic surgery, and aesthetic dentistry. The demand is huge.
Okay.
It's also used as a healing agent for wounds and decubitus ulcers.
Okay.
In topical application, it even has a specific code in the ATC classification of medications.
A drug code. So that really underlines its importance.
Yeah.
And what else in the medical field beyond aesthetics?
So it's used in a technique called viscosupplementation, which involves replacing synovial fluid that's lost during arthroscopies, those minimally invasive joint surgeries.
Okay.
So think of it as, adding oil to a squeaky hinge.
I see.
In viscosupplementation, HA acts as the new lubricant and shock absorber for the joint.
Okay.
But if we're talking about volume of use, the main medical application for hyaluronic acid is as a filler material in surgery and aesthetic dentistry.
Okay.
It's used in implants and fillers to smooth out skin folds and, as we said, stimulate collagen production,
Right.
which prolongs that rejuvenating effect.
Could you give us some specific examples of, those cosmetic uses that we might be familiar with?
Yeah, sure. So it's widely used to fill and shape lips and cheekbones,
Okay.
to smooth forehead lines and, other skin marks. It's also administered to reduce severe acne scars and other skin problems that cause tissue loss.
Okay.
So the injection technique is usually right under the skin where there's no muscle, directly into the wrinkle.
Okay, I see. And does it have any other, less known uses in the field of aesthetics or medicine that we might not be as familiar with?
Yeah, it's actually used in fertility clinics.
Right.
Procedures to increase tissue volume,
Right.
and even as a nutritional supplement to relieve joint pain in cases of osteoarthritis and to strengthen connective tissue.
Okay.
It's also been observed to have the potential to neutralize free radicals, those unstable molecules that can damage our tissues.
Okay.
And something very interesting is its successful use in treating interstitial cystitis.
Interstitial cystitis.
Yes.
By direct installation into the bladder.
Okay.
It's even used in veterinary ophthalmology.
Wow, that's a long list.
It is, yeah.
Going back to the cosmetic issue, are there any differences in how it's used since it became popular in the 90s?
So since it was introduced in cosmetics in 1996, mainly to hydrate the epidermis by reconstituting skin-supporting fibers.
Right.
Our understanding of it has, kind of evolved.
Yep.
Now, we know that the ability of HA to penetrate the skin depends a lot on its molecular weight,
Okay.
which is measured in units called kilodaltons, KE-day.
Okay.
So high-weight molecules above 1,000 kilodalton
Right.
are just too big to penetrate.
Okay.
Intermediate weight ones, around 300 kilodalton, have some penetration ability,
Okay.
and low-weight ones, below 130 kilodalton, can even increase skin thickness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So not all hyaluronic acid in cosmetics acts the same way.
right.
So for those of us concerned with skincare, what would be the key takeaway?
Right. So the takeaway for your skincare choices is that hyaluronic acid on a label is not enough.
Right.
You got to look for products that specify a low molecular weight
Okay.
to get deeper hydration benefits. And this brings us to an important point. The indiscriminate use of hyaluronic acid fillers by untrained professionals can have serious adverse effects,
Okay.
especially in nasal treatments where there have been cases of deformity, cartilage atrophy, granulomas, necrosis, and even vascular events and difficulties in later surgeries.
An important reminder about the need to go to qualified professionals if you're considering this type of treatment.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about its use in athletes.
Okay.
What can you tell us about that?
So sprains are one of the most common injuries in sports, and this is where HA has shown interesting potential.
Okay.
So there was a Canadian experiment that investigated whether HA injections could accelerate recovery
Okay.
after an ankle sprain.
I see. So how did they conduct that study with the athletes?
So the team, led by Dr. Robert J. Petrella, divided 158 athletes with ankle sprains into two groups.
Okay.
One group received HA injections and the other a placebo.
Okay.
Both groups followed the standard RICE therapy: rest, ice, compression, and elevation, with bracing or casting depending on the the severity of the injury.
Okay.
And they were followed up for 90 days.
Okay. And what were the results of this experiment?
Well, the results were actually quite promising.
Okay.
So 90% of the athletes who received HA were able to return to training within 8 days,
Yeah.
compared to 71% in the placebo group.
Okay.
And in the case of competitive athletes, the difference was even greater.
Okay.
Those who received the injections returned to their sport in 11 days,
Okay.
while the placebo group needed 17 days.
Wow, that's a significant difference in recovery time.
It is, yeah.
So what do they think is the mechanism behind this, this acceleration?
So it's theorized that the hyaluronic acid could be forming a sort of scar in the injured ankle ligaments,
I see.
kind of helping them repair. And currently, regulatory approval is being sought in several countries
Okay.
for the use of HA in treating ankle sprains.
Interesting. Let's move now to another area where HA has been extensively researched.
Okay.
Knee osteoarthritis, something that may be of interest to some of you listening.
Right, yeah.
So what can you tell us about that?
So the effect of intra-articular injections of a specific type of HA called GF20 has been studied
Okay.
in patients with mild to moderate knee osteoarthritis.
Okay.
And they analyzed changes in the concentration, viscosity, and elasticity of HA in the synovial fluid 6 months after the injections.
Okay, so what did they find in those studies on knee osteoarthritis?
Well, they observed a modest increase in the average HA concentration in the synovial fluid.
Okay.
So 13% at 3 months and 10% at 6 months.
Okay.
Which suggests that one of the mechanisms by which the injections could be relieving osteoarthritis symptoms is by promoting the natural production of HA in the joint.
I see.
Interestingly, HA has actually been used in the knees of racehorses with arthritis
Okay.
since the 70s to reduce inflammation.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I remember reading that the recommendations on its use in knee osteoarthritis are not exactly unanimous.
They're not.
No. So the clinical guidelines from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, which were reviewed in 2014, they don't recommend the routine use of HA injections for knee osteoarthritis.
So what's the problem with that?
So the crux of the matter with injections for knee OA seems to be the lack of rigorous, large-scale studies that definitively demonstrate significant and lasting benefits over placebo,
I see.
which makes it difficult for health organizations to recommend its widespread use.
I see.
So the main reason is that the quality of the studies testing its efficacy is considered low,
Okay.
and therefore the potential risks of the injections might not outweigh the uncertain benefits.
I see.
So it's important to keep these different perspectives in mind.
Yeah, that's a crucial point to keep in mind if you're considering this treatment. Now, let's talk about what is currently being researched about hyaluronic acid.
Okay.
What are they working on right now?
So one area of interest is research on its medium and long-term effects.
Okay.
So there was an experiment at the University of Michigan
Okay.
that injected hyaluronic acid into one of the forearms. Okay.
Of elderly female volunteers
Okay.
and a placebo into the other.
Okay. And what did they discover in this long-term study?
So what they found was very interesting. The hyaluronic acid not only occupied the space of the lost collagen,
Okay.
as was expected, but it also stimulated the fibroblasts, the collagen-producing cells, to produce more of this protein.
Okay.
This dual effect would explain why the benefits of HA can be cumulative and, more noticeable between 6 months and a year after the injections.
I see.
And a dermatology professor at Tulane University corroborated this observation of medium to long-term improvement.
Okay. Was there any criticism of this study on the long-term effects?
Yeah, so it was pointed out that the group of volunteers was small
Right.
and that the injections were applied in the arm and not in the face, which is where aesthetic treatments are usually performed.
Okay.
However, experts defend that it's likely that the effects and how the substance works are the same in facial skin. Okay. And what is being investigated in terms of producing, new forms of hyaluronic acid, those derivatives that you mentioned?
Right. So biotechnology is playing a key role in the development of HA derivatives
Okay.
with specific molecular dimensions,
Okay.
seeking to further enhance their functions.
Okay.
So, for instance, in conditions where fat tissue is lost, leading to skin atrophy, these modified HA molecules are being investigated for their ability to provide structural support and potentially stimulate the body's own tissue regeneration.
Okay.
So these derivatives are believed to be, potentially beneficial for treating other skin conditions characterized by atrophy and collagen loss,
Right.
such as lipodystrophy associated with HIV or, the side effects of prolonged topical steroid use.
Okay, interesting. Finally, let's talk about the economic impact of hyaluronic acid. It seems that it's become a major market globally.
Definitely.
So what can you tell us about that?
Its growing use in aesthetic and reconstructive surgery has made it, a sector with a huge economic impact. Okay.
In 2004, the price of the cheapest kilogram was around $5,000 a year.
Wow. Okay. And where is this HA obtained from commercially, to meet this demand?
So traditionally, it was obtained from natural sources like rooster combs,
Right.
shark fins,
Shark fins. Okay.
cow joints, fish processing waste like intestines and eyes,
Okay.
and even from the umbilical cord.
Wow. A very diverse range of sources.
Yeah.
So how is it mainly produced today?
Well, nowadays production is mainly carried out through bioengineering
Okay.
by bacterial fermentation of uric acid
Okay.
or from natural sources, which are still, common.
Okay.
Rooster combs are a very profitable force
Okay.
due to their abundance as a byproduct of the poultry industry
Okay.
and their high concentration of hyaluronic acid induced by testosterone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the bovine sources that you mentioned before? Are they still relevant in current production?
So the vitreous humor and synovial fluid from cattle joints were important sources.
But their use has been considerably restricted
Okay.
due to health concerns like bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease.
I see.
On the other hand, the Marine Research Institute, the IAM, has patented methods
Okay.
to extract HA from fish processing waste,
I see.
seeking a sustainable alternative.
Okay. And innovation doesn't stop there, right?
No.
I know there are different types of, patented HA that offer different benefits.
Exactly. So the development and manufacture of derived compounds has generated numerous patents.
Okay.
Some examples are non-animal stabilized hyaluronic acid, or NASHA,
Okay.
which, because it doesn't contain animal proteins, doesn't require skin testing before treatment.
I see.
And DXella, a formula with double cross-linked hyaluronic acid molecules
Okay. designed
so that the filler effect lasts longer.
Okay. We've come a long way, haven't we?
We have, yes.
From basic biochemistry to, cutting-edge clinical applications and the global economic impact.
It's amazing.
So to conclude, what would be the key takeaways that we should take from this deep dive into hyaluronic acid?
Right. So in summary, we've seen that HA is a unique molecule with, a particular chemical structure that gives it this remarkable ability to retain water.
Right?
We've explored its diverse origins
Right.
and discovered its wide range of applications, ranging from cosmetics and aesthetic surgery to sports medicine and the management of osteoarthritis, although, the recommendations there aren't always consistent.
And its ability to retain water seems to be the common thread in most of its benefits,
Yeah.
both for skin hydration and joint lubrication.
Yeah.
It's almost like like a hidden architect inside our body.
Precisely. So its role in tissue health and the aging process is undeniable.
Right.
And this brings us to a final thought for you all.
Okay.
Considering its many functions and the continuous research in developing derivatives with, enhanced properties, what future applications could we see for this fascinating molecule in medicine and beyond?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so it's important that, as informed listeners, you consider the balance between its, promising benefits and the need for informed and responsible use.
A provocative question to close this episode.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the science and history of hyaluronic acid.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to another deep dive, where we take your sources and really get to the bottom of them.
Exactly.
Today we're diving into the Wikipedia page for Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind.
Okay.
So this book was originally published in Hebrew in 2011,
Right.
and then in English in 2014. And it's really sparked a ton of conversation. And we're going to cut through all that for you today.
Yeah, it's been quite a phenomenon. A lot to cover.
So what's the mission for this deep dive?
Oh.
It's to understand the core arguments of this book that spans the entire history of humankind, from the Stone Age right up to the 21st century.
And it really does try to tackle it all, which is part of what makes it so interesting to look at, I think.
Yeah, and we want to see how it landed with readers and experts alike.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because it's a blend of natural sciences and social sciences.
Yeah, it's not just a history book.
Right.
It's trying to bring in insights from all these different fields to really get at what makes us human, what makes us tick.
Yeah, okay, so one of the big things, we were talking about this before we started recording,
Yeah.
like why did Homo sapiens end up on top out of all the different human species?
Right. It's the big question.
What's Harari's take on that?
Well, he argues that it wasn't just about being stronger or smarter as individuals. It was our unique ability to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. That's what really set us apart.
So what's the secret to that massive cooperation?
He talks about the cognitive revolution around 70,000 BCE. This is when he suggests we develop the capacity for imagination. We started believing in things that don't physically exist.
So give me an example. What kind of things?
Well, think about gods, nations, money, even human rights. These are all concepts that we collectively invented and believe in, but they don't have a physical reality in the same way that, say, a tree or a rock does.
So they're not just abstract ideas, they have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. Harari argues that these shared beliefs, these shared fictions, are the very foundation of large-scale human cooperation. They allow us to organize ourselves in complex ways.
Okay, so like religions.
Yeah, exactly. Religions allow millions of people who've never met to share a moral code, a set of beliefs, and work together towards common goals.
Right.
And it's not just religion. Political systems, trade networks, legal structures, they all rely on this shared belief in abstract ideas.
So it's like the glue that holds human societies together.
Exactly. It's like the operating system for human society, you could say.
I like that.
Yeah. And he uses some really great examples to illustrate this.
It's like money.
Yeah, money's a perfect example. It's not inherently valuable, right? It's just pieces of paper or metal. But our shared belief in its value allows for these incredibly complex economic systems to emerge.
It's a collective agreement.
Precisely. And he even goes as far as to say that political and economic systems often function in ways similar to religions.
How so?
Well, they provide a framework of beliefs, values, rituals even, that bind people together. They give us a sense of identity, purpose, belonging. It's a really fascinating perspective on how societies work.
But this power of belief, it's not always a force for good, is it?
That's a really important point. Harari highlights that the same ability to believe in shared fictions that enables cooperation can also lead to discrimination.
Right.
Think about racial prejudices, sexual prejudices, political prejudices. They often stem from imagined hierarchies and differences that we collectively believe
This
in.
is like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And he even suggests that achieving a completely unbiased society might be fundamentally impossible because our capacity for cooperation is so deeply intertwined with these shared beliefs, these stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who the other is.
So going back to those early Homo sapiens, how did this ability to imagine and cooperate impact other species, like the Neanderthals?
That's a really interesting part of the book. Harari posits that prehistoric age sapiens, with their newfound ability for complex coordination and innovation, were likely a major factor in the extinction of other human species, like the Neanderthal.
Of the megafauna.
Yes, and a lot of megafauna as well. The giant animals that roamed the earth at the time, like woolly mammoths. Our ability to organize and hunt collectively, to plan and strategize, gave us a significant edge.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of shared fictions, right?
Right.
So let's look at another big turning point, the agricultural revolution. We often think of it as this huge step forward for humanity, but Harari presents a more nuanced picture, doesn't he?
He does. He sees the agricultural revolution, which began around 10,000 BCE, as a kind of paradox.
In what sense?
On the one hand, it led to a massive increase in the Homo sapiens population.
Right, there were more of us than ever before.
And it also led to the success of certain species that we domesticated, like wheat and cows. So there were more of them too.
But what was the downside?
Well, Harari argues that for most individual humans, and definitely for the domesticated animals, the agricultural revolution might have actually worsened their lives in many ways.
Really?
Yeah, it's a provocative argument.
So how so?
Well, hunter-gatherers, despite facing different challenges, often had more varied diets. Their daily lives were probably more diverse and stimulating.
Okay.
Agriculture led to a reliance on a few staple crops, which increased the risk of famine and disease if those crops failed.
Right.
And it often resulted in much harder and more monotonous labor.
So you're saying, like, we might be living a more comfortable life now than a pre-agrarian human, but are we necessarily happier?
Exactly. That's the question he's raising. He's pointing out that progress isn't always a straight line of improvement for the individual.
And this ties into the book's portrayal of our relationship with animals too, right?
Absolutely. Harari doesn't shy away from highlighting the often violent and exploitative relationship humans have had with other animals throughout history.
And that relationship really intensified with the domestication of animals during the agricultural revolution?
It did. And this theme of our treatment of other living beings runs powerfully throughout Sapiens. It makes you think about the ethical implications of our agricultural practices even today.
Right. Okay, so from this decline in individual well-being, despite collective agricultural success, let's zoom out again
Okay.
and look at Harari's idea of the unification of humankind over time. What's the core of that argument?
Well, he sees a clear long-term trend in human history towards increasing political and economic interdependence.
Right.
He points out that for centuries, most people lived within empires.
Okay.
And he argues that what we call capitalist globalization is effectively creating a single, interconnected global empire. It's a process of things becoming more and more linked.
So what are the main forces driving this unification?
According to Harari, the key drivers are money, empires, and universal religions. Money acts as this universally accepted medium of exchange, breaking down cultural barriers.
Because everyone wants money.
Right. Empires, while often built through force, tend to integrate diverse populations and spread common ideas and infrastructure. And universal religions offer a shared set of beliefs and values that can transcend local and national boundaries.
So they provide a common framework for many different people.
Exactly.
So it's like this gradual drawing together of humanity over time.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Now let's talk about the scientific revolution. Harari sees this as another huge turning point, right?
He does. He places the scientific revolution around 1543 CE, and he presents it as a uniquely European phenomenon.
Why European?
Well, he argues that the real innovation wasn't just new discoveries. It was a fundamental shift in mindset among the elites.
Okay.
A willingness to admit their ignorance and to actively seek knowledge through observation and experimentation.
Yeah.
That we don't know everything attitude was revolutionary.
And he links this newfound humility to European expansion around the globe.
Precisely. This willingness to acknowledge ignorance, coupled with a drive to explore and understand the world, became a powerful engine for early modern European imperialism.
Right.
The pursuit of knowledge and technological advancement went hand in hand with the expansion of European power and influence, ultimately contributing to the globalized world we live in today. It's a somewhat uncomfortable connection to consider.
So in the midst of all this progress driven by science, Harari raises a kind of surprising question about happiness.
Yes. He argues that despite all the incredible technological and societal advancements since the Stone Age, there's a surprising lack of solid research into the history of happiness itself.
Okay.
And he provocatively suggests that people today might not actually be significantly happier than our ancestors in earlier eras.
Really?
Yeah, it makes you think about what truly contributes to well-being beyond material comfort and technological progress.
It does. And the book also looks ahead, doesn't it, to some pretty radical possibilities for the future of our species.
It does. Harari concludes by contemplating the potential impact of modern technology, things like genetic engineering, the dream of immortality, and even the possibility of non-biological life. He uses this powerful analogy suggesting that humans are becoming like gods, capable of creating and modifying life itself.
That's a big claim.
It is. And he suggests that this could ultimately lead to the end of Homo sapiens as we currently understand ourselves. It's a profound and somewhat unsettling vision of where we might be headed.
So it's a real journey through time that the book takes you on.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, the Wikipedia page mentions that Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, was a significant inspiration for Sapiens.
Ah, I can see that.
Can you see the similarities?
Definitely. Both books take this wide-angle lens to try and understand the major forces that have shaped human civilization.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how these big, often provocative ideas have landed.
All right.
Let's dive into the reception of Sapiens. First of all, it sounds like it's been just a phenomenal success with the general public.
It has. The numbers are really staggering. First published in Hebrew in 2011, the English translation in 2014 just exploded in popularity.
Like, how popular are we talking?
Well, it was a New York Times bestseller for an incredible 182 weeks, including a 96-week consecutive run. That's almost 2 years straight. And it's been translated into 65 languages as of May 2022, reaching a truly global audience.
That's massive. And what about the critics? What do they have to say?
Well, according to Bookmarks, the overall reception from critics was largely positive.
Positive meaning like good reviews.
Yeah, lots of good reviews. Publications like the Sunday Times and the Times gave it glowing reviews. The Times even called it top form.
Catchy.
Yeah. It also won the Wenjin Book Award in China in 2014. The Guardian in 2018 hailed it as a publishing phenomenon and one of the best brainy books of the decade. And it was even shortlisted for the Royal Society of Biologists Book Awards in 2015.
It's a lot of accolades.
A lot of accolades.
And it got some pretty high-profile endorsements too, didn't it?
It did. Bill Gates listed it among his top 10 favorite books, and Mark Zuckerberg also recommended it. Kirkus Reviews gave it a starred review, praising its energetic exploration of major historical debates. The Times described it as mind-thrilling and said it sweeps cobwebs out of your brain. And the Sydney Morning Herald found it to be always engaging and often provocative.
So it really captured the public imagination.
It did. There was even an exhibition based on the book at the Israel Museum in 2015 showing its cultural impact.
Wow. But the Wikipedia page also hints that not everyone was quite so enthusiastic, especially when it came to initial critical attention.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Ian Parker, writing in The New Yorker in 2020, suggested that the book initially thrived in an environment of relative critical neglect.
Meaning it didn't get a lot of attention from critics right away.
Yeah, that's right. He quotes Harari's academic advisor, Stephen Gunn, who makes the point that no single person can truly be an expert on the meaning of everything or the history of everybody over a long period, perhaps suggesting the sheer breadth of the book made comprehensive critique a challenge.
So it's hard to really pin down and critique.
Yeah, maybe. And then there's a more direct critical voice from the scientific community.
Okay.
In a 2022 article in Current Affairs, neuroscientist Darshana Narayan offered a more pointed critique.
What did she say?
Well, based on her own expertise and consultations with colleagues in neuroscience and evolutionary biology, she argues that Sapiens contains numerous and substantial errors, and she believes these go beyond just minor disagreements.
So, while it was a hit with the public and many reviewers, what about the reaction from academics and scholars in relevant fields?
The scholarly reception is a bit more mixed. Some were very critical.
Like who?
Well, anthropologist Christopher Robert Hallpike, for example, didn't see it as a significant contribution to knowledge.
What was his main issue with it?
He argued that the facts presented weren't new when they were correct, and that the more novel ideas were often flawed. He even described it as infotainment with sensational displays of speculation and what he called blood-curdling predictions.
So he wasn't a fan.
Not really, no.
Were there other notable criticisms from scholars?
Yeah. Science journalist Charles C. Mann, writing in the Wall Street Journal, noted a whiff of dorm room bull sessions about some of Harari's claims, pointing out that they were often unsourced assertions. And evolutionary anthropologist Avi Tushman in the Washington Post identified what he saw as contradictions between Harari's scientific approach and a fuzzier worldview, although he still found it to be important reading.
So even amidst the criticism, there's this recognition of its impact.
Exactly.
And finally, there's philosopher Galen Strawson.
Right. Writing in The Guardian, Galen Strawson found parts of Sapiens to be extremely interesting, but ultimately felt the book was let down by carelessness, exaggeration, and sensationalism. He specifically mentioned what he saw as Harari's neglect of happiness studies and a misrepresentation of the work of Adam Smith.
So a real spectrum of reactions, from enthusiastic praise to some pretty harsh criticism.
That's right. It's a polarizing book in some ways.
The Wikipedia page also gives us some interesting bibliographic details, like the original Hebrew title, Kitzer Toldat HaEnoshut, which also translates to A Brief History of Humankind.
Oh, interesting.
And it mentions an earlier self-published English title, From Animals into Gods, and the fact that the book has been adapted into graphic novel versions.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's reached an even wider audience through different formats.
It's really had a remarkable impact.
Well, this deep dive into the Wikipedia page for Sapiens has certainly shown us a book that has had a massive impact, sparking widespread discussion and offering a truly expansive and often thought-provoking perspective on the history of our species, from our earliest cognitive abilities to the potential for a radically different future.
Absolutely. And the diverse range of reactions, from enthusiastic popular acclaim to rigorous academic scrutiny, really underscores the ambitious nature of the book itself. It's a testament to how a single work can capture the public imagination while also prompting serious debate and critical analysis within different fields.
So considering Harari's central argument about the power of shared fictions in shaping the course of human history, it leaves you, our listener, with a final thought. What news stories are we collectively creating and believing in today?
That's a great question.
The ones that will shape our future in profound ways.
It's something to think about.
And with this power to construct and embrace these shared narratives, what responsibilities do we have in choosing the stories that guide us?
It's definitely something worth pondering.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.